Have y'all seen that No King's Day reality check video yet? This one?
Here's a No King's Day reality check. Have you heard this idea that if 3.5% of a population protests nonviolently, social change is a slam dunk? The nonviolence part of that is a real problem.
As somebody who advocates very strongly for nonviolent direct action and has been working through a series on nonviolent resistance tactics, it's no wonder that I got tagged in this video, and I appreciate that that creator is using his calm voice. He's trying to be very gentle and reasonable. Right off the bat, he mischaracterizes what the 3.5% rule actually is. So I went into this video immediately like a little bit sus. And I do want to say here before I talk about what he said in his video, I think he and I are probably aligned in our goals. Since his name is like Anti-Fascist Dad or something, like we want to stop the fascists, even if we may not agree 100% on all tactics. Now, to be fair, Chenoweth never described the 3.5% rule as a slam dunk, and it doesn't mean 3.5% of the population turning out one day for a protest. It is about the likelihood of a resistance movement succeeding and toppling an authoritarian if they engage in sustained collective action. Chenoweth has repeatedly explained that it is descriptive, not proscriptive. It's not some magical threshold that you meet where suddenly a dictator just steps down. And in fact, their data indicates that nonviolent resistance movements are successful a little bit more than 50% of the time. It's just that violent resistance movements are twice as likely to fail as nonviolent ones. Nowhere, never, ever, ever did Chenoweth say that it was a slam dunk. And I think a lot of people have glommed onto this 3.5% rule because they need some hope, right? They need something to help organize around. And at the point when the 3.5% rule was being talked up initially, I think a lot of people were using it to motivate people without digging deep into the history, into the research itself. And I think that's okay. I think it's okay to have that be the starting point of what should eventually become a much more nuanced conversation. And I think to some extent that this creator was trying to have that nuanced conversation. He just seemed to have, frankly, a very condescending view of nonviolence that is entirely inaccurate. Let's make it really clear here, nonviolence is not passivity. A nonviolent resistance movement, nonviolent direct action is not just more of No King's Day. I have made many videos talking about the utility, the purpose of events like No King's Day. Yes, they're about boosting morale, they're about giving people hope, they're about encouraging folks to take action, helping empower people to stand up and speak out and move onward, progress toward more effective tactics. It's also a very visible demonstration to the pillars of support under the regime that, like, hey, this fucker isn't as popular as you think. You sure you picked the winning team? You sure this is going to go well for you? This is all of the people who are standing against you. This is all of the people that are standing against your guy, and the movement is growing. Most importantly, events like No King's Day are about recruitment. It is helping regular, everyday Americans who have never stood up against a fascist before take those first baby steps, right? It is all about helping reduce the barrier to entry, meeting people where they're at, and helping them level up. I have to keep reminding fellow leftists in my comments that most people are not as radical as you are or as radical as you think you are. Most people are normies. Most people are not even on the political left, much less willing to take radical actions against the government. But we have to have a massive public movement of regular everyday people to stand up and say no to what Trump is doing. The message of nonviolence is appealing to grannies and veterans and people with little kids. We need them to contribute to the movement in any meaningful way that they can, and telling them that the only legit way to resist is to be willing to riot, be willing to have your body broken, be willing to smash shit and go to prison. You're going to turn people off. They're not going to want to step into this work. I think too many people who make content like this do not understand the utility of messaging and do not understand how recruitment works. They don't understand how to reach people. So again, there was this condescending framing of nonviolence from this creator in a way that was completely inaccurate.
You may have grown up with the term nonviolence shining like a pole star over every discussion of how we can accomplish sociopolitical change.
Nope.
But what does it really mean? And who defines violence beyond the police, the courts, and others in power? The term nonviolence seems to have a spiritual glow to it, reflective of its origins in the saintly persona of Gandhi, who was no saint,
Yeah, no shit, dude. We all know that Gandhi was no saint. And I again find this framing like almost offensive. I realize I'm not using my de-escalation techniques right now. That's fine. Nonviolence doesn't have a saintly glow to it. Why are you trying to make it sound like it's some ineffectual spiritual, connection to your sky daddy or whatever? No, a lot of us come to nonviolence not from a moral or ethical position, but because it's a tactical choice and we want to win. I promise you, there's nothing passive or submissive or actually even particularly tends toward nonviolence in my personality. And no, most of us were not raised with nonviolence as a pole star. We live in a culture that is steeped in violence, that glorifies violent resistance, both in our media, in our theater, in our cinema, in our literature, in our houses of worship. In evangelical America, violence is glorified. It is all this imagery of Christ as a soldier king. You're arming yourselves for spiritual warfare. It's always violent imagery. It's always might makes right. It's always about how power and violence work together. And that violence is coupled with righteousness. Like I'm not sure where this guy was raised, but not in evangelical America. Now, I do agree with this creator that we should have a definition of violence that is not concocted by the state, by law enforcement, because I don't personally think that smashing property is violence. In a capitalistic society, law enforcement is there to protect property. They're there to protect capital for the capitalists. And so they think that smashing shit, that damaging property, is as bad or worse than brutalizing human bodies. And I fundamentally disagree with the idea that graffiti or breaking things, smashing windows, etc., is inherently violent. A lot of other people in nonviolent movements will disagree with me on that. And I also understand that when you engage in those kinds of actions, that law enforcement will use that as a justification to brutalize the most vulnerable members of your group. And in nonviolence, we have a priority for keeping each other safe. The focus is on solidarity and community. And so we don't engage in actions that allow us to vent our anger, but don't actually forward the cause of our movement, and also that put at risk the most vulnerable in our group. We don't do that.
To believe that embodying a kind of noble and peace-loving faith in the long arc of history bending toward justice was the only real power that changed history.
No.
And along with
That's
this
not
came
true.
a very pious self-image that mapped onto the iconic photos of hippies placing flowers in the rifle barrels of riot cops in the hope of spontaneous collective awakening. Now today, the theory of nonviolence has grown beyond its spiritual aspiration roots while retaining what I would describe as its irrational faith. It is now a think tank-approved, purportedly evidence-based method guarantees movement success.
Nope. Again, I think this is a disingenuous misrepresentation of what advocates of nonviolence talk about and support. Nobody says that success is guaranteed. Nobody says that. What we say is that the cause we believe in is worth fighting for, and that we want to use effective strategic tactics in order to achieve our goals. Now, this creator goes on to talk about flaws in Chenoweth's work and then talks about Benjamin Case, particularly his book Street Rebellion, which I think is worth a read. Now, I've heard the kind of framing that this creator has from other folks on the left, basically like Gene Sharp and now Chenoweth, are an attempt to control to pacify the masses with some kind of ineffectual inspo. That fails to acknowledge that Chenoweth, at least back as far as 2016, has been talking about riots, unarmed collective violence, and even armed violence, and what measure of utility and efficacy they have in resistance movements.
Further, I believe that the premise we should all remain calm and protest, in an orderly fashion with our signs in one hand and our lattes in the other, or else we'll mess it all up, can make people tend.
If this is what you're framing nonviolent direct action as, your condescending, disingenuous take means that you shouldn't be speaking about nonviolent direct action. The fact that he went on to say, if you're committed to pacifism, come what may, nonviolent resistance is not passive. It's highly disruptive. This creator is fabricating a definition of nonviolent resistance that fits his narrative. This creator also completely ignores the large body of evidence that violent resistance movements are less likely to result in a democracy after the revolution than nonviolent resistance movements that may have some instances of unarmed violence or burning buildings or rioting. We not only have to focus on the resistance tactics we're using now, we have to think about the consequences of what we're doing and what it sets us up for in the future. I understand the conversation this creator was wanting to have, but I'm disappointed with the disingenuousness of it.